Thanks, David. Let's get this. All right. So this is the inside of an office. Probably many of you have worked in offices that look like this. You've got cubicles. You've got, different sizes of workstations, offices. The paint on the walls is different, but as you go from company to company, you pretty much see the same thing. Cubicles and employees working in their own workspaces. And when you think about innovation, you shouldn't just think about technology innovation, you should think about innovative ways to work, innovative workplaces. And so when you think about how you're going to start your company, or when you're working at a company, the ways in which the workplace will change for the future, you start thinking about a few things. You start thinking, well, maybe in the future, employees would have more freedom to do what they want. Maybe in the companies of the future, the workplace would allow folks to maybe work whenever they want and wherever they want. Some companies call this flex time. Work whenever you want. Come in, just get your stuff done. Some companies call this ROWE, results only work environment, where you can work from wherever. Right? So it doesn't matter where you're working, work from home, work from Tahiti, as long as you get your stuff done. But when you start thinking about how these companies are going to be enabled, or for your own company, you have to think, what are some of the most innovative companies in the world doing today? So you think, maybe they have cult-like followings. Maybe they've got 20% time to work on whatever they want. And so you go back and you say, well, are they enabling more freedom, and are they enabling their employees to do what they want? Is there ultimate flexibility in the workplace? Maybe they've got on-site daycare. Maybe they've got laundering service. And so you think to yourself, maybe I need this for my company. What are the things I need in order to enable my employees to get the optimal path for performance? Whether it's the best results, whether it's the happiest employees. How do I enable that? And you start to pick and choose these things you see in some of these innovative companies around the world. Maybe I'll have casual Fridays. Maybe I'll bring in on-site chefs. And the intuition is that in the future, you'll have employees kind of working on their own pace, working in whatever they want in order to enable that best performance and happiest employee experience. But as it turns out, the intuition doesn't line up with actual facts. So the intuition says, well, if I let my employees do whatever they want, they're going to choose the optimal paths for their own performance and their own happiness. And it turns out that that may not be true. So in 2001, Dan Ariely did a study, which we see mirrored in academia, that we see in the workplace. He went to MIT, and he broke his students into 3 sections. He said, Section 1, there's a term paper due at the end. There's 3 term papers due at 3 intervals throughout the term. The first third, the second third, and the last part of the term. You don't have a choice when they're due. You just got to hand them in at those dates. The second group, we're going to let you choose when your term papers are due. There's still 3, but you can hand them in whenever you want. And the last group, Section 3, you have 1 term paper due anytime throughout the term as long as it's before the end. So what you've got is this idea of self-imposed deadlines, those who don't want to procrastinate, those who actually just want to, let me figure out what's optimal for me. I'm going to be the happiest, and I'm going to have the best marks if I can choose when I can hand in my papers. And then you've got this group 1, which has the externally imposed deadline. Right? I've got to hand it in at 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3. I don't get a choice. And the intuition again is, if I can choose, I'm going to be the happiest and get the best marks. Of course, in this case, we saw that the intuition was wrong. At MIT, by a large statistical difference, the first group did the best. They had the best marks. Now, why is that? Right? Well, we can postulate that having these externally imposed deadlines helped frame the way in which they worked to a more optimal degree, better than what they could choose themselves. So the optimal path wasn't the freest path. It was the one where we set up a structure to allow them to get the best performance. The corollary to this study is the interesting part, not just around the marks and performance, but around the happiness that the students felt. So the students tended to be actually happier in the first group as well with their performance. So The work that they did made them happier. The performance was better. So again, the freer model wasn't the optimal path for the students. And we see this in the workplace. So what I want to expose to you guys is 4 myths we see in the workplace that maybe are hindering performance in your organization. So the first myth is actually that perhaps democracy is the most optimal organizational structure. It sounds like a good idea. Let's have folks vote on things. Let's have the majority rule. If we want to have, free breakfast in the company, let's vote on it. If we want to have higher salaries, let's vote on it. Sounds like a good idea, but it actually doesn't end up working well in practice. It may not be the optimal path for your company. The optimal path, in my opinion, is best performance from your employees with the happiest employees, because those two things go hand in hand. Right? So a democratic structure looks more like a pyramid. You've got folks at the bottom who vote, they have elected leaders, they make decisions, and they make changes in the company. So instead of a democratic system, what's a system that actually makes more sense in a company? So what we do at Extreme Labs is we have something called a duocratic system. Do as in just do it. It's different than democracy in that it enables small teams to get things done. Now again, it's not ultimate flexibility. We don't just say, hey, small teams, go do whatever you want. We set up a framework, like in the student example, a framework for them to get things done so they're not being micromanaged, but they have a framework to get aligned with the company goals. So let me give you a few examples of a duocracy or duocratic method. A duocracy is if the coffee machine breaks down, somebody calls in a repairman, charges the expense on their credit card and expenses it later. That's a duocracy. That's not me waiting for someone to fix the coffee machine or sending an email saying the coffee machine is broken. That's somebody fixing it. That's duocracy. A duocracy is when I was on vacation, one of my employees had their laptop stolen, claimed the insurance, bought a new laptop, and expensed it. That's a duocracy, not waiting for process. Right? So when you have these small teams, these flat organizations with the duocracy, with teams getting things done, how do we make sure they're actually aligned in the right way? So the second myth I want to talk about is that everyone in your company needs a computer and a desk all to themselves. So when you're thinking about orientation at companies that you've started at, you come in day one, right? They give you a laptop, they give you a workstation, they give you a workspace, right? It's the way things happen in most companies. But what I want to postulate is a different idea of working. We do something at Extreme Labs called pair programming. Pair programming is this idea where 2 people work on the same problem together. They're both intimately involved with the problem. Let me give you an example that we see in another field, rally racing. So have you ever watched a rally race? There are 2 people deeply involved on the end goal, which is actually to finish first. In rally racing, you've got the driver. He or she is focused on the current driving experience. Steering wheel, brake, pedal, clutch. How fast should I go? Do I have to turn? That's the driver. The navigator is also intensely focused on the task at hand, but in a different way. He or she has the map. They're looking at the weather conditions. They're looking at the fuel gauge. Is there a turn 50 meters ahead? Is there a jump? Is there a dive? They're both intensely focused on the same problem. Now, pairing in the workplace is very similar, except that the roles can change at any time. If I could move that steering wheel and pedals over in the rally car example, that's what pairing is. There's amazing side effects that happen when you have 2 people working on the same task. It doesn't have to be programming. It could be accounting. It could be PR and marketing. It could be sales. The side effects are as follows. You have 2 people working on the same problem, higher quality. You have 2 people working on the same problem. You have robustness in the organization. In the coding example, if one person gets sick, leaves the company, someone else has touched every line of code. Quality is higher because 2 people are solving problems together. You also have these secondary effects which you don't think of from a pairing example. So in today's world, when you have Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Kunal mentioned this earlier, it's really hard to single task, to focus on one thing at a time. With pairing, you actually are able to do that because it's really hard to multitask with somebody watching you. It's hard to check my Facebook or my email or to see the IM from my wife when I'm pairing with someone. So you have this idea of intense work while you're working. So we've got pairing And we've talked about pairing, which is this myth. And we've talked about the idea that actually you don't need a democratic organization, you need a duocratic, these small teams. So how do you enable these small teams to actually get a lot done? How do you pair them up in an optimal way? So the third myth I want to talk about is this idea of interns as a nice to have. So our speaker before, Dr. Hussain, talked about hiring interns at Ryerson. And now we really feel at Extreme Labs that interns are not just a nice to have, they are mandatory to have. Think about the internship at a typical company, right? You've got a large company, they talk to the university, they have an amazing relationship, and they say, let's have a few interns. They put them in cubicles, right? We talked about earlier. Maybe you have a big software project and you have them work on a couple of buttons. That's not the intern experience you should be fostering. What we do is we pair them with our full-times. Every full-time pairs with an intern. There are no intern jobs, there are no intern projects, they're just jobs and there's just projects. They work together to focus on the same problems that we're working on in our company. Now, why are interns mandatory? Interns live in the future. They're not just the future, they actually live in the future. They grew up with technology, they grew up with the internet, they speak in a different way. I guarantee you they send probably 2 orders of magnitude more text messages than you or I do. They are different, they live in the future. They bring talent, smarts to the organization. They bring creativity, they bring energy. In HBR magazine a couple months ago, they said there was a great article that talked about having meetings, and they said, at every meeting, you should have 30% of the constituents of the meeting be under 30 years old. You want to make sure you're not missing anything in your organization. Interns are mandatory. All right, so we've talked about a duocratic system, we've talked about pairing, and we've talked about interns. And so lastly, I want to talk about how do you reward your employees in a way that actually incents them in the right way. Right? And there's lots of talk and lots of research being done about rewards because the myth is that cash is king. That cash is what incents people, and that cash is what actually everyone wants as a reward. And as it turns out, cash isn't the ultimate incentive because we see this in performance. Right? If we're talking about the optimal path for employees, best performance, and happiest employees, we don't see cash as being something that folks are actually using to get that leverage. Right? And when you think about rewards, you have to think to yourself, well, how am I going to reward my employees so that they actually give me that loyalty, that performance, and they're happy in what they're working on? Right? How do I reward great behavior? And as it turns out, most HR systems focus on either cash or points or gift cards or some massive HR system. It doesn't tend to actually give you the performance that you want. And what's interesting about this is that we've solved this problem before. If you think to your personal life, you don't actually have a big HR system at home that you say, well, what should I get my wife for Christmas? I don't go down this checklist of, well, should I give her cash? Should I give her gift cards? Do I have any points to give her? Right? I don't think through that methodology when I think about what should I get my wife for Christmas. Instead, right, I use coercive techniques to figure out what I want to get my wife for Christmas. Right? Is she dropping hints about a Tiffany bracelet that she saw? Is she talking to her friends about some handbag she saw at Michael Kors at Yorkdale? Is she leaving her Amazon wish list open? Right? There's these techniques that we already know how to use in our personal lives that we're not taking to the workplace in order to figure out what our employees want. So either you have to talk to your employees about what rewards you're seeing in terms of what's going to incent them, or you should have someone in an organization who can do that for you. Right? A couple of great examples. We do a referral program for hires, and I had an employee who was going on a trip to Brazil. Right? And I asked her, hey, you've referred a couple of employees. We have a referral bonus, an iPad. It doesn't make sense. I asked her, I said, you're going to Brazil. Does it make sense for us to give you, just pay for your trip to Brazil? She was ecstatic. Right? Another employee who's a DJ. Right? We talked to her, and she said, hey, I'm looking for a DJ recorder. It's like $99 DJ recording equipment. We bought that for her. These small little rewards would have a much bigger impact than a $500 bonus or a $1,000 bonus. It sounds counterintuitive, but those are the techniques you have to use in the workplace to incent your employees. So we've talked about duocracy. We've talked about pairing. We've talked about internships and how they're mandatory. And now we're talking about how to reward your employees so that you actually get the optimal path from your employees, the optimal performance, and the optimal happiness. So what are the actual results that we're seeing in the workplace by applying these types of techniques at Extreme Labs? Well, we're happy to say we're seeing a bunch of interesting results and interesting numbers coming out of these. One, we're seeing extremely low attrition, especially in a hot mobile space, extremely low. We're seeing a really high conversion of folks who come to interview with us who want to work there just from seeing and feeling the environment. From the internship side, we're seeing an amazing conversion. Those who work with us as interns, right? They have a 4-month job interview with us, but they're also interviewing the company, right? We have a high conversion rate of those who've worked with us, who've worked at 5 or 6 other companies, who want to come and work with us full time. We're also seeing some secondary effects. We have an extremely large number of female developers at Extreme Labs, which is showing that we have an amazing work experience. So finally, to close, not all the problems of the workplace have been solved. When you're thinking about your work environment or innovation in the workplace or the future of the work environment, you have to think to yourself, what are the things that I can use in my environment? And myths like these that we're debunking, can they scale to larger numbers? Does it work in non-technical environments? We've scaled it from 15 people to 110 people. Does it scale to 1,000 or 10,000? So you have to think to yourself in your company, not just our company, but how is this going to scale for you? So I want to leave you with one last quote, and it's one from Jack Welch, which I actually going to modify a little bit. But he says, change before you have to. And I'm going to say, innovate before you have to. Thank you.